So you can start.
Yeah, happy evening for those who joined from various parts of India. Of course, a very happy evening to Mr. Balaji Sundararajan, our expert speaker for the evening. So it is my customary to talk about Spin Chennai as part of the introduction. For those, I see a lot of new faces. So for the benefit of them, I'll touch upon Spin Chennai profile. Spin Chennai is about 27 years old, one of the exclusive and dynamic spins amongst the 100 odd spins across the world. For not only the impact it has been creating through the reach, the programs, but also for consistency and relevancy with the future focus. Spin Chennai has been the pioneer in promoting various high maturity and quality and management practices, processes, frameworks like CMMI 2.0, ISO 6 Sigma Lean, TOC, BS 7799, GDPR, Agile, Malcolm Baldrige, Balance Scorecard, Blue Ocean Strategy, 5S, 7 QC tools, TQM, ESG, of late. I think I can go on and on. We have done sessions in all of these areas. We have experts in all of these areas. We identified digital transformation maturity as an important component way back. So as a result, we are currently working on a digital transformation maturity for small and medium enterprises. That is one thing which is in works. Also, ESG, we have been bringing a lot of focus, and we collaborated with the Gulf-based GEC group in bringing a huge focus on this with the CXO community. During 2022, last year, we have included this as a key focus area for submitting case studies under Watson Awards. Spin Chennai also has been active on topics like metaverse, which have huge potential. And Spin Chennai is an Atmanirbhar initiative to startup innovation contribution to intellectual property filing and thought leadership continues with full vigor. Our steering committee members continue to play an active role in various committees and setting global standards, including CMMI version 2.0, Agile, GDPR, and others. Our vision and mission at Spin Chennai is to build a very open and world-class knowledge ecosystem, which is very compelling, highly relevant and value-adding, distinctively futuristic, and passionately co-creative. Some of the world-renowned gurus have been part of Spin Chennai in the last 2 to 3 years, include Mark Johnson, Dr. Jeff Sutherland, co-creator of Scrum and Agile framework, Michael Krigsman, the international columnist and anchor of CXO Talk, Professor Manu Vora, the international management guru, people from Google YouTube, Mr. Lakshmi Shankar, who was a senior leader at Twitter. Now he is a vice president at Google. And of course, Wat Sampre spent more than 10 years with us. And before his untimely death, he was with us at Spin Chennai. Our ecosystem is a 4,000 plus member strong community. You can think of the who's who in terms of domain experts, SMEs, thought leaders, leading practitioners, researchers, academics, HR experts. I think all of them are there. In terms of frameworks, models, technologies, we cover the entire gamut. So I think there are 7 ways to engage Spin for those who are new. As a member, you want to be an individual member, you can become a member for 1 year and then renew it. Or if you want to do it for 5 years, there is a very attractive membership fee. And if you are a corporate wanting to have become a member, platinum membership is there, gold, silver categories are there. You can be the other way to engage with Spin is through our training programs as an attendee, or if you have deep thought leadership on some subjects which you want to share with the audience, you can be a speaker as well. One of the contestants in What's Humphrey Awards and other challenges what we open for members time to time. You could be a faculty, a trainer for one of our training programs, or you could be a strategic partner like our international journal, IJITCE, or you could be a sponsor for some of our events, or even academic partner as well. So those are different ways you can engage with Spin Chennai. Coming to today's topic, which is the approach for a AI first enterprise. I think we in the last half a century we have come a long way in terms of AI. So though it has been there since 1958 or so, it has made a tremendous leap only in the last few years, particularly in the last decade. I think the rapid coming together of speed of processing power, cloud, storage, networks, all these capabilities have resulted in the processing of large amounts of data, seeing patterns, and all these AI developments being possible. So interestingly, I go back to the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where I did my BE Computer Science, where artificial intelligence was a subject 35 years ago. And myself and two of my friends were the only ones who chose artificial intelligence for the project. Our project was writing a natural language interface to a database using Lisp and Prolog, right? Interesting to see that you were one of the early people in AI. So if you look at the AI dynamics, it is based on three horizons. The horizon one, which is the conventional AI with the prediction, recommendation, logistic regression, classification, rules-based, all that. That is the conventional AI. Now, slowly, the next horizon, deep learning, involving a higher accuracy and predictability with the object detection, speech recognition, facial recognition, entity extraction, neural networks. These are all becoming popular. They've already become popular, right, in terms of usage and implementation. And the third horizon, in terms of generative AI, that are explainable and interpretable. We are seeing ChatGPT, Bard, so many others. Bard real-time with the feedback loop, self-learning, video insights, generative networks, AI governance. These are all becoming important topics. So as we interact, I think we will have more and more questions on this topic of okay, AI can be applied in certain areas, but can enterprises start as AI first enterprises, right? Maybe if you're a startup, yes, you can do that. But if you're an existing enterprise who are deeply mired into existing processes, how do we transform it into a AI first enterprise in terms of mid-flight? That is a question we all have. Today's session is going to be very interesting as Balaji enlightens us on what is the approach towards a AI first enterprise and what are the limitations, exclusions, what will be the impact of such enterprise, how far will it go? So can we expect 10x, 100x kind of impacts from those enterprises? What is acceptable or expectation, right? Those are all questions we have. Hopefully, Balaji will touch upon. Balaji, heads the automation and AI at SOROCO, 500-member organization, growing rapidly fast, and he has a deep and varied experience in IT services spanning AI, automation, business platforms, product engineering, cloud, and ADM services. He was earlier the automation AI head at Infosys before moving to SOROCO, and he was building large AI platforms at Infosys. So he spearheaded the creation of an IoT platform and also played part product head and part platform engineering head, and has led many critical wins for Infosys in this space. He has a very rich exposure to cloud-hosted business platforms, hands-on experience in platform strategy and business case creation, market research and platform positioning, product evaluation and selection. I think definitely he is one of the best persons in this area to enlighten us today. Without spending any more time, I would like to invite Balaji to share his thoughts. Before that, I would request all of you to unmute and give him a big applause. Over to you, Balaji.
Thank you, Dr. Rajaram. I think you laid out very well, and thank you for that overview on SPIN, what you do. It's a great endeavor, and I'm hoping that I think this community will enlarge and actually share knowledge and become mutually beneficial on an ongoing basis. And thank you for this invite. It's a great opportunity and honor. And I still vividly remember the opportunity that you had given during the FICCI Digital Summit a few years back. I think we had a very similar topic. I think 2017-18 we were still talking about the first levels of AI, and I think we were talking about democratizing AI at that point in time. I think we got in touch with Raghav, so it's good that you were able to remember, recollect, and then get me back on the stage here. So thank you all, and thank you all for the participants. I know it should have been a long working day, and I think you taking time off post this particular long working day. I'm hoping that I can make some I can share knowledge and mutual exchange ideas in particular space. This is definitely a very hot space, and I think incidentally the first slide that I had is something which Rajaram already had actually conveyed. He just used a different terminology, but I was actually not sure about the kind of audience, but then later on I realized it's a very software and IT centric, so people would have been largely acclimatized to these terminologies. So before I get into this, so Dr. Rajaram and Raghav, I had actually taken the liberty to slightly change the topic to make some excitement with generative AI. So I changed the topic such a way that in the age of generative AI, what is the approach? AI first enterprise in the age of generative AI. So I think that people with generative AI will get excited and maybe listen a little bit better to this particular topic. That's why I chose this. Without much ado, let me share my screen. Let me know if you are able to see it. You are able to see it?
Yeah, we are able to see.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So so AI first enterprise, I think Dr. Rajaram clearly articulated. So for a startup, it becomes easier, but when it comes to large enterprises, what does it take to become AI first? And what does it mean, correct? And what are the imperatives and why should they do it? And I think the next one is generative AI. That is something which is currently the wave, right? So this is something which I think Dr. Rajaram rightly talked about. There are multiple levels, and he used the word horizon. I just used for much more simpler terms, levels. Conventional AI, it is still basically where a lot of enterprises are dabbling with. There is real work that is happening. If you are looking at, and predominantly many of you are from software services, that kind of a background, I'm sure you will see a lot of projects in this space. There's a lot of business money coming in, right? But are the volumes enough for you to basically classify it an AI age? Maybe not necessary. For whatever reasons, the reasons could be that business might not have been that comfortable taking the complete leap taking the human outside the loop and only fully entrusting it with AI, right? So whether the predictions and the classifications can hold turf on its own, maybe not. So it was more aiding decision making. That's basically the conventional AI, right? Then basically came the deep learning, where I think with the ability to handle higher complexity with large volume of data, but still the time taken, the performance and the accuracy levels were not extremely high for it to make a great impact. Of course, it make a difference, but if you take certain use cases, it would still basically feel that there is something which is still missing. There's still a gap, because of which the enterprise adoption in even in deep learning stage was actually not that great. The excitement was a little lesser, right? The next horizon or the level, which is generative AI, which is basically the current one, the last, couple of years, where we are talking about generative AI, which allows the AI models to carry context, is able to explain the results, as well as bring in an element of responsibility, right? So that's basically where we are right now. Now, and there is a lot of excitement. I will cover that in the coming sections. So we are in the generative AI space. There is a lot of work that is being done. There's a lot of models, foundational models, research work that has actually progressed. It has actually hit the mainstream. There's a lot of startups that have actually started picking it up and basing their models, business models on generative AI. Right now, we are actually in the cusp of moving from level 3 to level 4, when basically, when OpenAI says, I'm coming, or Microsoft is coming up with GPT-4, they are actually saying it is borderline AGI, but there is a different school of thought, and AGI stands for artificial general intelligence, which is very human level intelligence in terms of the decision making, the ability to have cognitive understanding and comprehension, right? For multiple, assume that a human being looks at a certain business problem. How would you break down the problems? For each of the problem, how would you look at various dimensions before you evaluate various options, solutions, pros and cons? That's the level of decision making that is needed for an AGI. And there are different schools of thought. Maybe we are at the cusp of AGI when it comes to level 4, when it hits the road. But there are schools of thought saying that maybe it is still far off. Okay. But AI, the key point is AI has actually progressed tremendously in the last 1.5 years, or maybe 2 years, with generative AI, and it has actually created a lot of excitement and buzz, and it has unleashed a lot of potential. There's a lot of hope that it can actually do things which we felt it was actually going to take a decade or so. Now, the question is, if the technology has graduated rapidly, where are enterprise are they keeping pace with adoption? And I will share my experience. I've been in the AI automation space for the last maybe since 2015, 2016. I've seen companies asking for POCs on predictions and regressions, and we started with basic models on random forest. We went and expanded to deep learning, CNN and RNN, and so on and so forth. Right? We deployed quite a few models for large enterprises who actually wanted to use this for decision making. Correct? How can I do field force optimization? Can I do fraud detection? There were several such use cases, right? But was the adoption great? If you look at the maturity of adoption and the size of adoption, there was a range of companies, deeply technology-driven companies, large e-commerce like the likes of Amazon. Of course, they are the pioneers, and they had actually, there are companies who had, even as early as 2015, had 200 data scientists. They had a huge data lake. They had a chief data officer. So there were companies with that kind of a maturity, even maybe some 8-9 years back. But I think they were few and far by. But if you look at the large set of the enterprise population, they were actually looking at piloting it. They were actually dabbling with maybe few models. And many of the models were built on laptop and basic data set. They did not have the maturity that maybe you are looking at right now. And in fact, most of the enterprises, when it comes to AI maturity, you will find that close to 70-80% are laggards when it comes to having the enterprise maturity, do not know how to create a model which is enterprise grade, which can stand the test of various governance that actually are needed, and putting enterprises at risk, right? And many times what you would see is that many enterprises actually were just trying to do AI for the fear of missing out. Some competition are doing, they want to do it. They just don't want to miss the bus. They will be having few data scientists. They will say, hey, can you try and solve this particular problem? So that's basically the scale in which people were trying it out, because of which the actual adoption at the enterprise side was always much behind the technology curve. So before we look at, before we move on, I felt that reimagining the AI first as an enterprise, it is important that we understand what ails the enterprise AI adoption. First of all, as I said, most of the business focus was actually on productivity and efficiency gains, trying to help in terms of decision making, rather than actually trying to completely reimagine the business. The confidence of business users were actually not that great. You will still find models, very few models hitting 90% accuracy levels, and that too with a certain amount of test data. But when it goes into production with varied data that comes from the market or the production data, you will start seeing that the accuracy level starts deflecting left, right, center, and there is a drift in the model performance over a period of time. Within a 2-3 month period from the time the model gets into production, the confidence of the business would have got eroded, and many times the model might not be even used, or you have to constantly rejig the model to ensure that it keeps pace with the performance. So the amount of return on investment, when it compared to the cost and the time taken, was actually not that great, and it actually eroded the business confidence. And the third one is that there is a huge fragmented technology and tool, and there is if you talk about 2015-16, the Watsons, the IBM Watson, and so on and so forth were pioneers. After that, there were a lot of open source models. Then basically you started seeing the cloud service providers ramping up their performance when it comes to model performance, with the AWS and Azure coming in. So there's a huge churn that is there, and there's a huge profusion. So there's always a confusion as to for borderline for decision making and for the kind of return, and what kind of technology that I need to hold on to, that I need to go in for it to become my future for the next few years when it comes to a platform. That was a big question. Customers keep asking us that, is this future proof? But our answer would be, it cannot be future proof because of the huge disruption that is happening. But at least does one platform tick all the boxes that need the enterprise, that suits enterprise grade? The answer was always that some of them will tick some of the boxes. For example, somebody will be very good in data ETLs, data strategy. Somebody will be very good in model management. Somebody might be good in model governance, but not necessarily all, right? So that was the situation. And it meant that the business had to invest in multiple tools and platforms for them to gain all of that feature, right? So that is always a challenge. And the fourth one is basically the timelines, infra cost, as well as the skill set. Skill set is always a challenge with data scientist, ML engineer, and so on and so forth. If you look at in total, all of these four played a huge role in terms of why enterprise AI adoption was actually not that great in the last 4-5 years, even though the technology was slightly ahead of the curve. Happy to take questions. Feel free to stop me, ask questions, share your thoughts. I will maybe give a few seconds if there are any questions before I move forward.
Hey, not now. I have a few questions. I'll come to that later. Probably if you're covering, I'll see whether it answers. My question is around how do you apply in my software engineering project? I do requirements management. That is where we play as a service company, right? How do you use this generative AI or AI is going to augment me? All those terms there. How do I use it in my day-to-day life, right? Currently, I'm using ChatGPT for few use cases. Like I wanted to send out an email, it gives me the template, just copy and paste it. So one thing is, how do you not get into the plagiarism check? So all those things are there. So more into this using in my software SDLC phases, and that's what I wanted to know. Probably we can have this question answered at the last also. Yeah.
Sure, I've taken a note of it. Thank you.
And probably you can cover one of the other questions. How do I use AI in sales, right? So or my program planning, right? So these are some of the questions.
Okay. Interesting question. Let me, let me think of it, and we'll try and answer. I'll give my viewpoint on that. Okay. So I think we're talking about generative AI. The scale of disruption is going to be, like the digital transformation with mobility, right? For example, I'm just giving a parlance. The kind of bus that you see is very similar to what you with, for example, the likes of ChatGPT. It is like the kind of bus that iPhone generated, maybe a couple of decades back, right? And that spun a huge disruption in terms of mobility coming into digital transformation. Now, this AI transformation, while we were talking about it for the last 5-6 years, I think with generative AI, it will actually get hit. There's a huge potential for transformation, real transformation, just like what happened between 2000 to 2020s, with the digital transformation space. Now, generative AI will force enterprises to reimagine. There is no choice anymore. 5 years back, and I was trying to cover the point that enterprises were dabbling, it was fear of missing out and so on and so forth. But now I think it is real. If they do not get in, I think they'll be lost. I think it will get into a situation where it will be like that. Every industry, there are already startups who have started using generative AIs to completely reimagine. Now it is now large enterprises cannot be left behind. Otherwise, survival is going to be a challenge. All right. Now, what does I'm just trying to articulate how the traditional model vis-a-vis a generative model the enterprise can actually focus on. With traditional model, it is actually decision making, right? It actually aids in decision making. And the second important point is when it comes to creativity and content creation, it was still in the hands of human. That was one big challenge. There were, of course, a lot of leaps in terms of image and speech and so on and so forth, but not with the degree of accuracy and the complexity that generative AI could handle. So largely, you would see that traditional AI models or the conventional AI models were restricted to decision making. Now, but that actually has changed, right? So it is not just about decision making with generative AI. AI is actually there to augment human creativity and innovation to the extent that it can, in many places, create human equivalent content and sometimes better. Okay, there are of course a lot of pitfalls, challenges. People call hallucinations and so on and so forth, which are real. But the kind of output that generative models are able to create are actually very similar in terms of creativity and the kind of possibilities are enormous. to the extent that even if we say that it cannot replace, AI can actually create. So there are musics being created, Harry Potter books being written, all by AI, right? So what was 2 pagers, 2 years back, can actually be now a complete book, right? And with much better degree of content creativity and so on and so forth. So that's basically the level at which it has matured. So what it would mean is that when it comes to the decision making and creativity, humans can actually start playing the role of a supervisor and an auditor rather than actually creating content, right? Now, this gives a perspective as to, for an enterprise, where to use AI and what kind of impact it will have on its workforce, right? So, for example, I will maybe touch upon your sales question, maybe sales and marketing, if I were to look at it. So planning and there's sales as a much broader thing, right? You start looking at what kind of product that you need to take to the market, who to target, what should be the kind of conversations, what kind of conversations you need to have with different levels of your target audience, for which you need to create content. So if you look at that particular gamut, conventional AI would have helped you in terms of market segmentation. It would have helped you in maybe account planning. It could have helped you with demand and forecasting and so on and so forth, right? This is the typical places where conventional AI will hold good. But when it comes to generative AI, the kind of marketing collateral, the kind of pitch that you want to do, the executive summary that you want to create, it can actually take an RFP and summarize it for you. It can actually create images that make it attractive. That's basically the kind of content that can get produced, thereby your you have an additional brain to look at what kind of messages that you want to give, what is the best summarization that is possible for a large content, so that if you were to make an elevator pitch, whether you have a 3-minute pitch, you have a 5-minute pitch, or you have a half-an-hour pitch, what kind of content you want to give for that particular timeline, you are going to be in a position to be able to get an additional input that can help you go and make those pitches, right? So that is one possibility when it comes to sales and marketing. Already there are startups which are trying to say that, hey, outsource your entire marketing, content creation, etc. to us. For each of, for example, if you're an Apple, and with Apple, for various segments and products, you want to basically create different, communication material. There are companies which use these generative AI capabilities to be able to suggest and recommend multiple possibilities that can actually make an impact when so that you have a better choice of choosing what kind of a marketing design that you want to go with for you to communicate, right? So that's the kind of potential that generative AI has. Now, 3 key features that actually will propel generative AI adoption in the enterprise. One is that earlier, and I think we touched upon, in the conventional sense, large enterprises had to create models for which they need data, which needs to be trained. And many of the places it is siloed data. And after that, they will need to spend time and effort and money on annotating, post which the training, etc. would happen. And for that, you need a bunch of skills: data scientists, data analysts, data engineers. So there was a cost angle, there was a data angle to it. Now with the generative AI, with open source foundation models that are coming into picture, and some of these models are actually on cloud based, for example, Azure based OpenAI, GPTs, right? You are in a position where the skill set need is reduced drastically, you already have a foundational model which are trained on, millions, billions of data. It's a huge data set. It is already very well performed. All you need to do is try and take that model, train it to your particular purpose, and it is able to give you much better improved data sets, and the skill set needed are actually much lesser. And the joke that goes around, and in fact, maybe that is the reality as well, prompt engineering is the hottest skill, correct? And in fact, if you would have seen, OpenAI has launched recently and prompt engineering training course as well. So in essence, what this has done is democratize AI. And I think we talked about democratization 4-5 years back in AI, but I think now it is really there. People just need English. That's all. English is the new programming language. That's what somebody said. Right. So that's the amount of democratization that has happened, which means that enterprise has a lot more reasons, has a lot of financial benefits as well to basically use this and make that as a launchpad. The second one is basically, I think I touched upon it, is the large pre-trained corpus. Now, the one challenge that, when it comes to model performance is that if you want to go beyond your data-centric decision-making models, you needed, something to do with text, speech, and, image, and so on and so forth. With generative AI, with the large training set that is already there, and the integration of the sensory mediums, right? You have a powerful combination that you can take a single use case like a call center, where you can have better speech recognition than what you possibly had in the last few years. You will be in a position to extract that particular text, right? Feed it in and possibly create images. So the kind of use case possibilities are tremendous. And when you bring all of these data, for example, look at an experience use case, customer experience use case. Somebody is calling a call center. The same person is writing an email, correct? Now you have two different mediums where the end customer is trying to communicate the same thing to you. Here's a problem. If you are in a position to bring these two together for you to take decisions, one through email, which is a text, one through speech, which is basically through the call center, you bring these two together for you to take a decision to act, right? And drive the next best action for that particular customer. The experience is going to be tremendous. And that is basically what with this, the generative AI is able to bring by bringing all of these three together, right? So these are three important features that I think will makes a lot of sense for the enterprises to latch on and to be able to create and flush out a whole plethora of use cases that can actually benefit them. So we talked about use cases. I'm just going to highlight a bunch of use cases here. What are the possible use cases? Content creations. I think I spoke about summarization of text, video highlights, editing of videos, creation of videos, semantic search. And semantic search earlier you used to go and do the search based on keywords and so on and so forth. But now it is not just about search, but it is also about generating the appropriate answer, right? So there is a certain question and answer that is happening. I think there is a question about software engineering. Definitely we'll touch upon it. Code generation is a huge opportunity. It's a big set of use case. There's a lot of LLMs or models that have actually come in, which are actually doing pretty well in certain language packages. Caption creation, marketing video. So net, there's a whole lot of use cases. But if you are to summarize it, any writing task, right? For example, generating as simple as a minutes of the meeting, a transcription, a call center speech to text. The call center agent say something, and the typical speech to text would be to just transcribe. But now what if you were to transcribe and it has to recommend that, hey, these are the 3-4 huge problem areas for that particular customer. These are the commitments. You are able to recognize that. See, the AI model is able to recognize the problem, is able to say that these are the commitments, these are the times in which you have to respond back. and that feeds into an action engine. The use case becomes very different. So you have actionable intelligence, in the, if I were to take a very security thing, you have a very actionable intelligence with regards to customer experience here, right? So that's the kind of difference that this use case, generative UI, changes the entire possibility. The third one is probably the ones which, a lot of us would have already tried out or using in many cases, is the question and answer with ChatGPT. I still remember 4 or 5 years back where we were looking at Stanford models and so on and so forth. One of the POCs that I still remember doing is to look at how can we answer a cricket commentary. Okay, so based on a cricket commentary, how can the question and answer be generated, the kind of challenges that we faced. But with ChatGPT, it's a huge leap, and the kind of possibilities people are using, it's just unimaginable. And the next set is, where it comes to creativity, design, architecture, UX redesign. And the last part I think is extremely important is, which will also have an implication for the way organizations used to manage people with regards to their knowledge that they have of the enterprises. Now, there is an equally a strong medium, maybe better, and that might not get demolished very easily, or it might not retire, is basically the models which can hold, your enterprise knowledge, what you do with your customer, what you do with the business, and so on and so forth, for ages, right? So it is not going to retire, it is not going to tire, and so on and so forth. So there are going to be a whole bunch of use cases around this as well. I'm just giving a perspective for the possibilities that enterprises can try and reimagine their business. If you want to get into an AI first, it is about infusing, AI into everything, and that is the reason why I'm talking about the kind of use cases that can be reimagined with. Another compulsion for enterprises is that the startup world has exploded. If you look at all of these areas, there are startups doing several things, and I'm just talking about a very horizontal centric thing. It's not even if you go into industry specific, there are several more startups. The amount of money that is getting pumped into the generative AI companies is tremendous. Now, all in all, it leads to a compulsion for the enterprises. Now, if you were to look at what enterprises are currently doing, this is the current state based on my current conversations with the customers, right? This is, and I'm happy to take your experience as well. Many of you might have a different experience. Maybe some of your customers are asking for more, some less, and so on and so forth, right? But what I see typically is that, for example, the publishing industry, they feel threatened. And some of them, there are different reactions. The likes of Bloomberg, the likes of Dow Jones have actually become leaders. They have thought through how to basically, evade this. And they went and used their data set, their core strength, which is basically that for 40 years of data that they have, they went and created their own GPT, and you have an AI for finance, right? But on the other hand, I also are, I'm listening to some of the conversations from publishing industry that, hey, how can I ensure that my content doesn't reach an open source LLM, right? Because they are clearly scared that their hard-earned research, their hard-earned material should not be easily published by somebody else, the IP infringement part. So there are questions like that with the publishing industry. Large banks, many of them are looking at creating their own LLMs. I think it is not that easy for them to go and use an open source. For example, JP Morgan, there's a news recently, and I just took it from the internet when I was reading a news. I don't know how far that is true, but it says JP Morgan restricted their employees' use of ChatGPT, right? So clearly, when it comes to BFSI, I think they will have their own restrictions. They will have their own, compulsions to create their own foundational, LLMs, right? And maybe they have to look at taking foundational models and then building it on their own, using their own data corpus. Same is the case with pharma and research companies. Now here, I've seen at least two, three different conversations with leading pharma and research companies. Some of them are actually dabbling with the likes of ChatGPT when they have to go to their distribution. So where they are, where the business functions and processes are not really something to do with their core research work and so on and so forth, they are in a position to be able to utilize it. But when it comes to use cases where there is a document summarization of a clinical trial, they are basically have to do a filing. And for filing, how can they leverage AI and so on and so forth? Definitely they have their own challenges, and they are looking at creating their own LLMs. Technology companies, of course, the Googles, the Amazons, all of them are actually heavily investing in LLMs and GPTs. Maybe there is one flavor when I talked about technology company. I think there is a question on, for example, a software engineering company. What are they doing? I think there is the size and span of software engineering companies are going to be different. Maybe, if they are going to look at reimagining every aspect of their business, right from sales to pre-sales to build to execution and so on and so forth. We will touch upon it when we actually try and illustrate an AI first company. So this is just to give a snapshot of some of the conversations and a picture as to where some large enterprises are currently in terms of generative AI, the conversations that they have, the thought process that they have. So I will stop here, take questions. If there are any further thoughts that you have, happy to take that.
Anyone on the call, you want to ask any questions?
I'm Sujata here from Chusa, Balaji. Thanks for the very informative session. My question is how do we make it actually AI first as part of the enterprise strategy? How do we weave in this as part of the enterprise strategy? That is my question.
Sure. So let me jump there. There are three primary pivots, Sujata. Okay. When it comes to the AI first, one is that you need to reimagine your business. Correct. Now, for you to reimagine your business, first of all, you need executive and leadership drive and support. And that is the reason why I was talking about why the executives need to have confidence on AI. And from my own experience, until the generative AI stepped in, at least the levels that I have and the kind of customers that I've spoken and engaged with, it was actually borderline. It was, they wanted to do it for decision making, or just because somebody else was doing it. The leadership was actually not seeped into it. They did not have the hands and heart on AI. But I think now we see that there is a wake up. The executive and leadership are actually thinking of talking about chat GPTs and foundational models, what needs to be done. So suddenly in the last 1.5 years, the conversations have actually become much more deeper and with a lot more conviction, right? I think that is probably what was missing earlier and what we see right now. And that is probably one of the most important one. Because if you have the executive and leadership support, right, then you are looking at few things. You can actually look at what is your strategic and business differentiator. That's the second important one, right? Well, if you're a bank, right, and if the equation between your income and your NPS score is quite high, okay, now the question can be is, okay, how can I increase my income, my fee-based income or interest-based income, which is probably the biggest revenue earner for a bank. Or the question can be that, okay, what is that if I do, can I do to increase my NPS in terms of customer experience, and how can AI leveraged for me to reimagine the way I or customer interacts with the bank? What are the various touch points? How can I reimagine? Right? There's a strong correlation between customer experience to NPS and NPS to fee-based income. Right? So this needs us this kind of a strategic thought process and top-down push from the leadership to the business. Now, I think if you look at every aspect of an enterprise, and if that can be questioned in a very similar fashion, say, I talked about customer experience. Now, if you were to talk about an order journey for, say, a telecom, or a supply chain journey for a large CPG company, right? If we have to ask similar questions, I think the top-down push that is going to propel that from the leadership to the business is going to force them to think very differently as to how the AI adoption can happen. And that is when the leap from a normal decision making to a totally different experience, a different way of doing things are going to be created, right? So I think that is the second one. The third one is that now currently AI is majorly driven by a certain small pocket of business. There is basically a bunch of maybe there is a data office team. There are a bunch of data engineers and data scientists, right? This is the small spectrum in which basically many enterprises operate when it comes to implementing AI. Now, this needs to change. For you to look at infusing AI into every aspect and for you to reimagine, it means that you need to start thinking of not just the customer journey and the business case, but you also have to look at what is your monetization possibility. How do you ensure that the data that you're going to generate is actually that you're going to utilize for generating the AI-based output do not have biases, because LLMs might have an intrinsic challenge of data biases. So how do you ensure that? How do you ensure that the IP infringements do not take place? So what it would mean is that the leadership needs to realign the teams such a way that there is business, there is IT, people with AI savviness, people who are LLM experts, people who have good expertise with regards to the entire life cycle of an ML engineering, and I will talk about that a little later, as well as people who can provide the guardrails and the governance in terms of responsible AI, right? People who can look at biases, who can look at it from responsible AI angles. For example, whether you are looking at gender-based, racial-based, you are ensuring that you are actually not getting into a competitive turf, you're not utilizing your competitive data. So those aspects, people with that expertise needs to be pulled in, and the entire realignment needs to happen, right? So that's the second important one. The third important aspect is about the policies. You need to have data is extremely key hog in this entire AI journey, right? For an AI first enterprise. So focus on data strategy. Currently, data are, many of the customers do not even have a data lake. So their data is siloed. One LOB might not share the other, data with other LOB. You will have those kind of challenges, right? And you will have basically systems with duplicate data. Some of them needs a lot of transformation before it can actually be brought under the common plate. So you need to have a data strategy. And for currently, what is also happening is for every AI model, people go and put duplicated effort in terms of identifying the data source, to the data cleansing, to the data transformation. So it actually takes a lot of cost and time. So if companies can focus on creating a data store, right, or a feature store rather, with the clear data lineages established, I think that will go a long way in ensuring that you can reduce a lot of duplication. you can actually, if there is a challenge, you can actually trace back, from where the data came in, and you can take rectification or remedial measures. So that's extremely important for you to have a data strategy. That is the next part. And I also spoke about the responsible AI part. And I think the last one, which is extremely important, is an AI platform. Now, there are, if you look at in the last 1.5 years, maybe many of the enterprises have started investing in AI platform, but even there I see a lot of duplication. One line of business might use some platform like C3, somebody else might use a Databricks, and so on and so forth. I think it is extremely essential that they have an enterprise strategy for an AI platform, starting with the data ETLs to the MLOps to model management and model governance. It is okay to have multiple platforms, but it needs to be centralized. It needs to be governed centrally. The usage can be federated, but I think it needs to have a central governance, right? So in my view, these are from my experience, what were the missing pieces that I saw enterprises lacking in the last several years. And with one, at least the reimagining business with generative AI, I think there's a lot more change in the way leadership perceives AI. I think that's a positive step. So it is actually forcing them to reimagine business. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. And I think there's a lot more realization that needs to happen with regards to the way the organization needs to be restructured, the kind of skill set that needs to be people need to be prepared with. So when it comes to large language models, if you were to talk about using an open source, right? And if you are contributing data, even if they say that you have a certain subscription and it will not go beyond the subscription, but does it mean that the model stops learning from your data? Not necessary, right? And each and every model that you adopt might behave differently. And GPT might behave differently in that sense from something else, right? So the kind of decision making that needs to go in terms of choice that is needed is extremely important. So I think this is an evolving space. The industry is learning, and enterprises are also basically just picking it up in terms of the kind of operating model, the governance mechanism that is needed. There's a lot more maturity now that I see in terms of the AI platform, but I think it is still very federated. There's a lot of duplication that happens in large enterprises. There's no single governance mechanism for all of these AI platforms that are actually there scattered. If somebody would have invested a few years back on Watson, somebody would have invested on C3I, somebody uses H2O, and so on and so forth. So there's no guardrail, there is no central mechanism there. I think these second and third are still laggards, and I think it is extremely important for enterprises to pull up and basically focus on 2 and 3. And there's a lot of, I see a lot of consulting work that is happening with these enterprises on 2 and 3. Any questions on this?
Thank you so much. You beautifully explained, and very true that it is not just talking about it, right? And they should also imbibe this as part of their, they should internally use the AI models for their enterprise decision making. It's not just for the customers. It should also be internally, they should be operationalizing it, internalizing it, using the models for their day-to-day operations. Yeah, very beautifully said. And you're looking at it all aspects.
Absolutely. Very true. This is a picture that I painted, looking at typical roles, key roles. I think you would see, I think I'd already spoken about some of the capability amplification. So, some of them are already doing, I think many aspects of what the data engineer, data analyst, data scientist would do might not be very different from what would have been 4, 5 years or 3 years back. But of course, with the advent of LLMs, it is a slightly different ballgame. The MLOps engineer continue to have this, and his work is getting much more simplified. But I think they have a bigger responsibility with the LLMs, how to ensure that cost optimization is still taken care of. But in my view, I think the biggest capability amplification that is needed for an AI-first enterprise is in the leadership and the business. I think this is where, this is the critical segment. And if this happens, I think the rest will be taken care. Now, when it comes to leadership, they need to be able to identify what is that will differentiate them. If you are going to be a bank, what will differentiate you? If you are going to be a CPG, what will you differentiate, right? Why will somebody, what will make customers increase the footfall? For example, and some of the strategic use cases need not be just your bread and butter business. I know that a large oil and gas company, which is both in upstream and downstream, is investing huge in autonomous stores. Okay, because they want to basically make their the retail space, the real estate that they have in various parts of the country, in terms of gas stations, they want to basically utilize it for creating retail stores. But the way they want to go is autonomous, which means that your entire capability, right from your image recognition with your real-time inferencing, all of that needs to come into picture, and much more, end of, it's a very closed circuit environment in which all the decision making needs to happen, right? So the strategic use case that they thought of is for them to have an additional revenue, even though it is not their bread and butter business, right? It is a great use case for AI, right? So if each and every leadership can think of those kind of strategic use cases and realign and push their business to reimagine, right? I think a lot of things will start falling into place. But when it comes to generative AI, leadership cannot stop with setting these strategic vision and use case statements. I think their involvement is going to be much more. And that is what I've actually highlighted here. The decision making on generative AI choices, such as what kind of foundational model, whether it is to be an open source, whether it is going to be something that they are going to take a closed loop or an open loop, they are going to spend a lot of time. What is the kind of investment that they are going to use, investment that they are going to make to be able to create that, is something which right from the CEO has to be involved in, because these are foundational decisions for an AI first enterprise, right? So, and beyond that, the motivation and change management getting reflected in a new revised people operating model, right? So in my view, I think the capability amplification, for an AI first enterprise, to sum it up, is actually going to be largely driven, driven right from the leadership to the business and downwards. And happy to take any questions on this.
Hey, people on call, you can keep entering your question in the chat. We should be able to answer that. We can go one by one. You can go ahead.
So the last one that I had is basically, when we talked about a platform, it is about bringing, all of this community of business, data engineers, LLM experts to the governance. So it's a end-to-end platform that an enterprise needs to have, right from their data store, data exploration, model creation, to model deployment, to model assurance and governance. This would mean that it is not just going to be one particular stack. You would see that there are, best of breeds in each of these particular segments. We need to be able to bring all of this together, tie it, and stitch it together for you to have a seamless experience, and then finally decide whether you want to take an on-premise or a cloud strategy, depending upon your compulsions. I think I touched upon it earlier. A lot of BFSIs typically go for on-premise and so on and so forth, right? It comes with a certain, of course, there are cost implications. If you are to run generative models on-prem, you better be prepared for that kind of an compute intensive infrastructure that would be needed. and hence basically, corresponding cost. Whereas basically, if you go for cloud, maybe the cost will be actually much, cost-wise will be more attractive, but you will have challenges with regards to data privacy, infringement, and so on and so forth. So it's basically a trade-off call. But I think this is extremely important for enterprises to bring all of this together. And I think, this is one sign of, in my view, an enterprise maturity when it comes to AI, being AI first. If without this, if they are trying to become AI first, for whatever kind of use cases, they will not be able to scale. They might have 100 different use cases, but it will start fumbling in multiple places, and the scaling is going to be a big challenge. Tomorrow, if there's going to be a change, you will not be able to trace back. Somebody basically creates a case. How will you defend? A lot of challenges that would happen if you don't have this basically set up in place. So I think I had covered the key compulsions, the kind of use cases, the three key imperatives for AI first with regards to reimagining the leadership support, the operating model for people, and last, the putting in place the right process and platform. If you're talking about AI first, I think this is what it is. We can get into different use cases for industry. I think there was one question on software engineering. I can touch upon it based on my experience. I think there was a question on how does something like generative AI help in terms of software engineering, reimagining software engineering, right? It's interesting, and I will give you an example. 5 years back, and I come from a large IT services company. We were trying to reimagine how we can do transitions much faster and much more cost effective. Okay. And that was basically the time the first of the GPTs were launched. We were trying to figure out whether the transition documents that we typically get, and I presume many of in the audience are basically software professionals. So you'll be knowing whether it is a business process transition or whether it is an application ADM transition, you are basically going to get a lot of documentation, whether it is process flows or application inventory and so on and so forth, right? Which is typically written down. Of course, there are tools that every company had done in the last 10-15 years to be able to capture it, do it in a semi-automated fashion and so on and so forth. So my first dabble with was with GPT was to try and see if we can automate the transition and generate some of the transition documents. Okay. And part of it was basically to look at code to be able to create documentation. The challenges that we faced with the very first iteration was basically that even for a Java language kind of a thing or Python, I remember that the documentation will actually be better within a function, but it will not be able to link across multiple functions and methods. But if you look at that compared to now what GPT-3 can do for you with regards to giving a code base, especially if you're talking about some very good packages like Java and Python, where and you can verify the levels at which the LLMs will be able to give you better results based on the kind of training data set. If it is basically in GBs, you can be much hopeful that it will be much better. If it's still in MB, you will still have challenges, right? So if you are looking at an ABAP code or something like that, where the training data set might still be in MB, the kind of output that you're going to get is not that great, but if vis-a-vis a Python or a Java. So I'm just giving my experience, but now if you look at it, it has come a long way, right? Right from process models, where basically people are looking at taking conversations with the business, doing speech to text conversions to be able to automatically create process flows. I think, and in the company that I'm working with, which is SOROCO, where we are actually a process mining and task mining, we are also trying to take a huge leap of faith with regards to generative AI with LLMs, where we are trying to auto create, human readable process flows, right? So from the data that we kind of collect. So there's a lot of work that is there right from the requirements analysis stage. And of course, if you go and use tools such as the Lambdas, the Copilots of GitHub, and so on and so forth, it is able to give you code. It is able to generate code documentation, test cases, which are actually very, very good when it comes to certain set of language packages, right? So there is a huge reinvention of the software engineering life cycle that is happening. And I'm just talking about the core software engineering life cycle, right? But and this extends to the support, application, maintenance, and so on and so forth. But now, if you were to go to the next supporting functions with regards to marketing, with generative AI marketing content, people are already using ChatGPT to create it. Now, there are specialized companies, startups, which are focusing on marketing. So I think this space is going to be completely disrupted. It is already getting disrupted. I think IT services will be one of the, maybe first set of industry segments which will become AI first in every sense. And I don't know who that gentleman was who asked that question.
Yeah. Thanks for that. You want to continue?
No, I'm done. I will take questions.
Sure. Hey, great. Hey, team on the call, you want to ask questions to Balaji?
Hi, Balaji. This is Ramesh. A wonderful presentation and very well done. I would say that the way you presented and the very simple way in which you explained it made a lot of sense. I'm sure that this is what you do for a living for an enterprise setting. To make sense out of the enterprise is something which is important, right? And I think it was the language that you have used, as you said, the new language is English. And the language that you have used to present this is amazing and outstanding. Now, when you am I audible?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So, Balaji, we today the enterprises live in a desperate tools, technologies, and whatnot. And you brought it. If you want to look at virtualization, you also mentioned Databricks, which is like if you look at it, I don't know what would be Databricks in 3 years, 5 years from now. One of the top, and they are making money, growing big time. So each one of these tools are trying to make sense out of all these things already. Okay. And from that perspective, how do you really see that the weaving of all the things, you don't have one silver bullet solution. Okay. So how do you go about that? Or are you saying that there is one solution which will integrate with each one of every product today? If you look at it at different layers of technology, brings in an element of AI. Okay. And how do you really go about integrating those, the outputs that comes, validating those, and then making sense really if one AI does not give you because AI's perspective is basically what data you have, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think
putting
very valid question and very interesting question. And I will give a practical thing that I had actually worked on. I had an opportunity to work on even maybe some 5-6 years back for probably one of the largest telcos in the world. Okay. Even then, basically, it was very desperate. See, the desperate systems, even in terms of the technology footprint, is going to continue, right? For example, just on the cloud, there are companies which have both Azure subscription, AWS, and GCP, right? There's no reason why, but they still have, and it will continue to be for very different reasons. Somebody would have acquired somebody, there's a different line of business, there's a different geography where the discount is better, where some of the services that Azure provide might be in some geography which is not there in some other geography. If you get into these nuances, you will see a whole lot of valid reasons, very valid reasons why some decision was taken to go for these kind of desperate things. All we need to ensure is that there is this central focus. There is a governance around it. And one very from my practical experience, one way of governing that is to try and abstract it out using a certain layer that large enterprises can invest. Maybe, when it comes to large enterprises, they can have the wherewithal to basically go and invest it. But I think these kind of platforms are also coming in where you are in a position to be able to bring, whether it is, at the end of the day, whatever model you have, you are in a position to say, this is my business case, this is my problem statement, this is the function, right? For which you identify what are the different models that you have experimented with, which is in production, what is basically the data store. As long as you are able to have this kind of a manifest somewhere, there, I think that is the very first step. Then you can actually go into double clicks of each of this. The right from the way you are publishing your feature, your data store. If you can have it, maybe, if there are 100 functions, different business functions that want to basically go and create, they don't have to redo a lot of stuff. So enterprise, while there's a disparate nature, I think enterprises can still create certain common stuff, which the entire enterprise can use at an abstracted level that can actually, reduce a lot of these overheads, cost duplication. And above all, you can actually know, who is using what. As long as these are maintained, I think that is, basic hygiene factor, basic governance can actually be established.
Sure, thanks.
Balaji, one quick question. If an organization is kind of AI first and also incorporating AI in every aspect, then the normal expectation would be that the organization will be delivering 10x efficiency, productivity. So what is the normal expectation? What can we expect from such an organization? Can we expect the world-leading products? All parameters, it should be exceeding the normal.
Yes, I think that's a very valid expectation, but I think the difference is going to be in the way you are going to execute that particular strategy, right? In many cases, you can have basically grand vision, grand statement, you can try and do all of that. But I think the difference is going to be, how well you executed that particular strategy, how well you have thought through that particular use case, and you are nimble enough that you can keep pace with change. Even in an AI-centric world, AI-centric business, if you are in a position to be able to be nimble and able to change with, less, time taken, I think you will be able to keep pace. And the returns are, I think it is going to be like more than the returns. I think this is more survival. And if you have very great differentiated use case, it could be actually winners takes all, right? So it is very hard to take, guess on the kind of returns. But I think I'm looking at two different spectrums. One is basically survival, for which you need to be there with regards to AI. The other one is basically your great differentiated use case, which can actually lead you to winners take all, where, your 10x, 100x can actually be possible.
Okay.
Wait, any more questions?
Yeah, I have one more question. How do you test the output generated from a content generated from a generative AI? Right? How do we verify that?
Okay. Very interesting question. I think there are models that are getting created for, actually, testing it out. That is definitely one possibility. Then you are basically looking at certain amount of extended, or different testing strategies that you can deploy, right from whether, you're talking about, how do you detect hallucinations and so on and so forth. So you need to have a very targeted checkpoint. And I think that is, and it actually differs case by case, right? So, and I can give only practical experience, and the practical experience is actually not completely, diverse. For example, if we were to talk about process model creation that we are currently experimenting with right now with using generative AI, right? We are able to actually feed in the kind of handcrafted process models that we have been doing, the customers have, for us to be able to figure out what is the kind of output that the generative models that are dishing out process model are creating right now. But that is very human intensive. The other way is that we have basically ability, for example, in our process mining and task mining, I'm just taking an example, we capture to the level of L3 and L4 level. And this L3 and L4 level is actually feeding into downstream applications. Downstream, it could be bots and so on and so forth. So one strategy that we are actually using for testing the output of this generative AI is whether the downstream systems are able to comprehend it, and what is the percentage manual intervention that is needed before the downstream systems can actually take that in an automated fashion and basically continue. That is a strategy that actually we are using. So actually, if you have that kind of a downstream strategy, it is possible. The third one is to create simple test harness to be able to use, start from experiment design, A/B testing and so on and so forth, is standard one. If you are looking at a very, conventional, model based output, Sujata. So this is basically from currently the kind of experience that I'm actually working on in terms of generative AI models.
Okay, then so that means we should have clear boundaries set and what is the use case against for which we are choosing it, right?
Correct. But, I'm just thinking, for example, if you're looking at a creative content, okay, that is getting generated, which is the possibility with generative AI, how do you test? I think that's a very different question, needs a lot more thought process.
Yeah. Okay,
I have a question. Thanks, Balaji. Very nice way you explained how AI and generative AI works. My question is, is it opening another Pandora's box for hackers?
Actually, that is definitely a concern that the industry experts have raised, and it is a possibility. Prompt engineering can be used if you look at it, even from a hacking perspective. So some of the prompts, the initial, if you look at the initial prompt, the way it was actually created was actually kept in mind with hacking as one of the use cases, right? So it is definitely a possibility, and we need to have those kind of guardrails. And from an and I think enterprises need to have those kind of guardrails. And what do you expose? What kind of data you take in, and how do you take in? I think a lot of data protection policies that needs to be enforced to ensure that basically you don't expose yourself to that kind of a threat. But when it comes to open source, that is actually a large possibility.
Currently, do we have tools to prevent this hacking from happening?
Okay, let me, that's a good question. I need to dig deeper onto that myself, and then, maybe I can do it back.
Thank you.
Balaji, Ganesh here. Good evening. Thanks for the wonderful session.
Thank you.
Balaji, I have a question with regard to healthcare use cases. If you can just elaborate a bit on how and what impact and difference it will make, with regard to any specific, healthcare use cases from your experience.
I think, when it comes to healthcare, I think it's a large segment, whether it is patient care. I think one of the fundamental use cases is with regards to patient care and elderly care and so on and so forth, right? What I can think of is basically this, integration of this sensory part. If you are able to get your, imagine a use case where you have to connect, remotely, and you have to offer basically how do you try and integrate speech? How do you integrate image? How do you integrate text? I think it is a great possibility. For example, if we have to do and speech recognition in a very real-time fashion, say something like with an NVIDIA Riva, right? To be able to, do it with a much more accurate speech, and you are able to get also feed in from, say, some sort of an IoT-based device which feeds you, images. You are able to comprehend speech and you are able to comprehend images together for you to be able to make out what is happening with the images. You are able to understand what the elderly is saying with regards to based on what he is talking in speech in a real-time fashion, to be able to bring these two together. And then assume that there is an AI model which can actually, it is trained on various diagnoses to be able to figure out and recommend in a very instantaneous fashion or a maybe near real-time fashion what are the possibilities. So, from a patient care, I think telemedicine and elderly care and so on and so forth, where you cannot afford to have 24/7 doctor sitting in. I think there's a whole possibility that you can open. I'm just thinking of this kind of a use case. And I think, telemedicine will become much more real. It will not be just based on prescription, based on what they say and somebody else says and so on and so forth. You have image, you have speech, you are able to diagnose. There are diagnostic recommendations that come on the fly. I think that's a great use case when it comes to healthcare.
Sure. Thank you, Balaji.
Balaji, one more question. Is it possible to cheat AI?
Cheat AI. Of course, it depends upon the kind of data that is basically, provided. And depending upon the kind of, for example, in the generative AI space, depending upon the kind of way the models have been used and the kind of training sets that have been used, I think there are possibilities of AI, at least, giving wrong information.
That's very dangerous, right?
It is. And if you look at that wrong information, that is what is basically, which is totally devoid of reality, is what is called hallucination. And, what if such kind of generated data is used to send messages? So that actually could come into cheating. So I'm just thinking of generative use cases, which borderline falls in this particular space of cheating.
Thank you.
A lot of interesting questions, practical, very, very practical questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Balaji.
Hey.
Over to you, Raghav.
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. We can.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Balaji, for accepting to speak at Spin Chennai. It was very short notice. In fact, I reached out to him on LinkedIn, and then he immediately accepted. It was just in 5-10 minutes. He said, "Okay, I'll do a session here." And then we had a lot of deliberations on what topic we should choose. Right? I think is it on AI or generative AI? AI first enterprise, and then he covered all the aspects. In fact, one of the things we wanted to ask him, which he covered already on this generative AI, bus around that, right? So in fact, we were doubtful of this date, 18th of May, because he had another presentation to the board of directors of a large bank in India. So fortunately, it got postponed, and then we are having the session today. So With that, no, I'd like to thank Balaji once again for taking time and speaking at Spin Chennai community. And in fact, you started with uh, what is the AI first enterprise? What does an AI first enterprise look like in the age of generative AI, right? And then you talked about all the three levels and going to the next level of AGI. You covered that part, and then the adoption, how it is in e-commerce. Technology companies are the fastest or the first ones to go, early adopters in that space. And one of the other points that we noted is that many companies adopt FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. I think that was one of the key reason. And then reasons why enterprises adopt AI. And then the most important part is the next slide, where you covered the use cases of AI in various areas such as software engineering or summarization of videos, text, right? Video highlighting, content creation, all those things, right? And then gave an example of how one of the bank is approaching it, uh, and setting up the mandate on the uh, governance models, guardrails. What do you do with multiple AI platforms, right? How do you manage it? And most important aspect of this capability amplification, where the leadership and business should be prepared for AI first approach, right? So no, that covers the entire spectrum of this topic. Um, and then once again, on behalf of the participants here and the entire Spin Chennai community, I would like to thank you, and we'd like to thank the participants here today. At max, we had around 19 participants. In fact, before or during pandemic, we had almost 60-70 people attending, and it started reducing. We started seeing this decline in the participation, even though the registration is higher. We used to think that, okay, if 100 people register, we think, okay, we come out with say 50% only turn up, and sometimes it goes less than that. So it's good to see that we have 18-19 participation. Thanks everyone, the participants, uh, for taking time off today and then attending the session. Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Balaji.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Balaji.
Thank you very much.
Very
It's been a
great.
wonderful opportunity, and thanks for sharing, allowing me to share my thoughts and my experiences.
Thanks, Balaji. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Balaji.
Thank you, Balaji.
Thank you.
Interesting. Thanks.
Thank you.